Hey.
We're back. Hey, you're not Holly. Yeah, your hair is just a little bit different. Oh, you're on mute, Sienna.
Oh,
there you go. We have two Hollies. Michael, we thought you abandoned us.
Change your name, Sienna.
Yeah, hold on. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was actually
Michael.
Okay,
We thought you abandoned us.
No, come on.
You got a haircut. I like it.
Oh, thank you.
Looks nice.
Thank you. Tell me more. What else?
I like that. Keep it coming, you know.
Keep it coming.
You look skinny? How about that? You look skinny?
My face looks skinny?
You look skinny?
Yeah.
Your hair is great. I like your shirt.
Thank you.
I got.
Because Mary Alice is mad at me, so she's storming around the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's warranted.
Are you like dieting, Michael?
Always. It's not dieting as much as like I just like to remove things from my diet every week and then talk about it on Monday, and it's done by Wednesday.
Nice.
She goes through these phases where she's like off carbs. She's on a juice cleanse. She's
we are best friends. I did a juice cleanse over this nonsense.
Yeah.
My husband wanted to know if I was going to give up my 4 p.m. cocktail.
No.
I did.
Don't be crazy.
Cleanse. And then I did the Whole30 for a whole 6.
That's hard.
For a whole 6.
Hey, Holly, you have to share the slide
New
deck.
program, whole 6.
Well, for 10 years, I've been having to take pictures next to Vicky's sack. It's very sometimes. She's like,
she keeps asking me to hang out, and I won't hang out with her just because.
Oh, stop it.
Her diet is, from what I can tell, her diet is a lot of wine, and then she somehow wakes up at 5 a.m. and still is able to run. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
That's actually very accurate.
I'm having coffee instead of wine right
now. Shelley, you have to come over while we still have the weather.
Yes, I would love to.
Yeah. How about an hour from now? 2 hours from now?
Yeah. There's still a little bit of traffic. Yeah, and our other friend, she wants to come too.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yes.
Dylan, where are you from in Ireland?
I'm from Dublin.
No follow-up. I guess that was not the right answer.
No, I guess not.
What are you doing here?
Crickets.
No, I went to Dublin, and I went to, so my friends, my cousin has a house in Ballyferriter down in Dingle.
Okay.
And we flew into Dublin, and they were renting a house up there, and then we drove to Dingle, and then we drove up to Galway. I love your country.
Dingle is a beautiful area.
It's just gonna. I just heard that. I've had 2 friends who've gone there and loved it.
It's amazing, and they make their own vodka and gin.
Yeah.
I mean,
Michael, that sounds very Irish.
That's where Anne went when she
Russian
went to
and
Michael.
Polish.
I know, she loved Dingle. We didn't make it to Dingle, but we did make it to Galway, and we were completely obsessed with Galway.
Yeah.
So when I travel, I'm not a great tourist person, but we went to the Cliffs of Moher. That place is the most spectacular place I've ever been in my life. It's mesmerizing. It's absolutely fantastic.
I only went for the first time like a couple of years ago. I don't know how I never got around to it, but I only went for the first time pretty recently.
It's really amazing. It is crazy amazing. It's way bigger than you think it is.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to We're Traveling to Ireland at Home happy hour. We're still waiting for a few folks to call in, so thanks for joining again if you're a repeat visitor, or thanks for calling in if it's your first time. We're going to wait for a minute or two for the rest of the folks to join before we get started. Anyone else been to Ireland?
Nope.
Me neither. It's on my list.
Dylan has traded in all that beauty for Kensington.
That makes total sense.
I know, right?
My thought was, Dylan, I could ask you about, I watch sort of to debrief and free my mind, junk reality TV on occasion. And there's some good stuff coming out of the UK, and I have trouble sorting through the dialect, like sort of the differences in accent and what it means. And I'm like, I'd love to pick your brain on that, but anyway.
I know, for like such a small place, people have very different accents, which is kind of funny.
You just threw on an American accent.
I lost my Irish accent very
He's
quickly,
losing
sadly.
it.
He's losing it, except
Certain
the number
words.
3.
Certain words. The TH sound doesn't.
I was going to say 3. Let's hear it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Ask him.
No pressure. No.
Only if you can say John will you become a real Philadelphian, though, Dylan.
I just need to use it like very smoothly into a sentence.
That's right. That's your homework for next call, Dylan.
What
Nice.
number comes after 2?
I'm not doing this on a call.
Oh.
Hey, Dylan, how many people
Right,
are on the call today?
We have 74 registered.
Ah, almost caught you.
Almost got you.
All right, well, why don't we get started? We have a lot to get to today, and we've had a lot of folks sign up. I think we have an incredibly interesting topic, and it's been, I guess, a month, I think, since our last call. So good to see everybody. Welcome back if you're a returning guest, and welcome if it's your first time. I am Shelley Azen, and this is HR at Home week, let's see, I have it hidden, week 12.
48.
Session number 12, yeah, week 327. If you can go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, our agenda for today is really, we created this as an opportunity to stay connected with the HR community that we have here in Philadelphia. We're going to have Keith Black give us a legal update. So what has been changing in the time of COVID that is important for us to know as HR professionals. I'll let Vicki in a moment introduce our best practice share for today, which again is going to be, I think, a really great discussion. And of course, this is happy hour, so beverages are optional. And with that, I'll turn it over to Keith. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. We have none.
Click it again.
There we go. So we have a few things of interest, basically, that we collected from the month of September. 2 of them are COVID related, one's not, just to throw a monkey wrench into things. The first is some revised Department of Labor regulations under the FFCR. If some of you recall, in August, there was a New York federal court decision that invalidated some of FFCRA's interpreted regulations, specifically 4, that the Department of Labor then went back and addressed. So I just wanted to hit on them because they are rather important. The first one, the court said that you don't have to have work available in order to take FFCRA leave. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As the Department of Labor pointed out, what are you taking leave from if there's no work available? So the DOL kind of doubled down on their position on that and said, no, you absolutely have to have work available to you and in order to take or to be eligible for FFCRA leave. It's not eligible for you if your employer shut down or went out of business or there's no work for you to do. The second one had to deal with intermittent leave. And this is an interesting one because unlike the Family Medical Leave Act, which talks a lot about intermittent leave, intermittent's not addressed in the FFCRA. So it's left to the Department of Labor to interpret it. And the Department of Labor said, yeah, we're going to allow intermittent leave, but only with the employer's permission. And basically their reasoning for that was they looked at the FMLA, which basically addressed intermittent leave for medical purposes, unexpected. Maybe you have migraines and you don't know when you're going to have them, or radiation, or things like that that you can't necessarily predict. And they looked at the FFCRA and said this is more akin to the parental bonding part of the FMLA because you're taking this leave to spend time with or to care for your children or others who don't have care. So they're doubling down on that and they're saying, yes, you do still have to have employer permission. However, they made an interesting distinction between what intermittent leave means. And what they did was said, in cases where schools are operating on a hybrid or alternative schedule, alternative day schedule, say maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the employee wants those 3 days off to be home because, or say they want Tuesday and Thursday off because their kids are not in school those days, Department of Labor said that's not intermittent leave, because each day when school ends or begins and ends is a full day of leave. So because there's a schedule saying Monday, Wednesday, Friday, taking Tuesday as a full day, taking Thursday as a full day is not intermittent. So it doesn't fall under that requirement. So if you have any employees who want to take leave because of their children's school requirements, and it's on an alternating day basis or a hybrid schedule, they don't need to get the employer's permission for that one. The other two that are, I'll mention just quickly, that are interesting, that the Department of Labor basically said, yeah, we'll go along with the New York federal court's decision, is the narrowing of the definition of a healthcare provider. What is a healthcare provider? Apologies, my dog picks us one particular time of the day to start barking at everything. So I'm sorry for that, but that's working from home, right? They narrowed the definition of a healthcare provider. Basically, if some of you recall back in March and April when we were first starting to try to interpret this and try to figure out what we meant by some of these things, who is a healthcare provider that could be exempted from the leave? And we looked at organizations like doctors' offices and critical care facilities and medical facilities. And the opinion at the time was basically, well, it could essentially apply to anybody who works for any of those places. We've narrowed that, we've reined that in a little bit now. So what the Department of Labor has said now is, it's either number one, the definition of a healthcare provider under the FMLA, which is a doctor, a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a number, right? No way, a number of specific titles, or it's somebody who provides diagnostic, preventative treatment services or other other services that impact patient care, such that if those services were not provided, it would adversely impact patient care. So when we were talking back then about, well, maybe the people who do IT or billing or accounting or HR for this critical care center would be exempted. No, the DOL has clarified that. And then the last one is when leave is required to be requested, or when notice of leave. The Department of Labor had originally said it has to be in advance of the leave being requested, and now it's saying as soon as practicable. So you can request leave essentially the day you give your notice of leave. It doesn't have to be sooner than that. That's the first one. The second one is a non-COVID related issue. And this is, I'm just going to touch on it really quickly, but it talks about the age-old debate about whether somebody's an employee or an independent contractor, and how do we determine that? And they're still looking at what some of you may recall, the economic reality test, where we have 7 factors that we go through all of them. And not a single one of those factors by itself is determinative. They all have equal weight. Department of Labor has come in now and said, we're keeping the idea of the economic reality test, but we're going with 2 core factors. And if those 2 core factors are aligned, you have a decision. If they go apart from each other, or if it's still not determinative, then we have 3 guidepost factors to look at. And it's basically saying the nature and control that the worker has over their work is the first one. So how much control does the worker, the person, have over the job they're doing, as opposed to the employer telling them what to be doing? And the second one is the risk factor for the individual. How much opportunity for profit or loss or a worker's investment is required in it? So those are the 2 core factors. And if they align, then you can decide whether somebody's an employee or an independent contractor. If they don't, then you need to look at the 3 guideline factors, and they are the amount of specialized training or skill that's required to do the work that's not provided by the employer. So the employer is not providing training for this. The degree of the permanence of the relationship. So if it's sporadic or a short duration, it's more likely an independent contractor. If it has no end in sight, it's more likely an employee. And then finally, is the work being done part of an integrated unit of production? And what they said there is, think of it like an employer's assembly line. So imagine an assembly line of workers being the integrated unit of production, and every job that's on that assembly line goes to creating that final product. It doesn't have to be a real assembly line, but think of it in those terms and say, does this particular job fall into that analysis so that it's an integrated part of that? If you took this job away, you wouldn't get that product. So that's what they came up with there. And then finally, the last one there, I just wanted to give you a little bit of kind of 30,000 foot view as we've had, 6 months or so of this COVID to look at. What has that meant for us in terms of litigation? So I just threw a few numbers up there, courtesy of Littler. Give them props for coming up with all of this. But the most common types of complaints, there have been almost 800 lawsuits filed since March 12th against employers related to COVID issues, almost 800 lawsuits. Most common, retaliation, and then wrongful termination, safety issues, leaves of absence, and discrimination in general. The top 5 states, probably not surprising because they align with the states having the most cases, but California, New Jersey, Florida, New York, and Texas are the top 5 states with litigation based on COVID. And then I just wanted to throw out really quickly, and then I'll shut up, three things I think to look forward to, probably a bad choice of words, to look ahead to as potential bases for litigation in the future coming out of COVID. And the first is this concept of immunity discrimination, which is kind of fascinating to me. And it's the thought that I'm going to give hiring preference to people who have already had COVID, with the thought, correctly or incorrectly, that they're now immune from it. And A, they're not going to get sick and miss time, or B, they're not going to infect my other employers. So look at that as a potential claim for some employees who abuse these things and ask questions in interviews that we know we shouldn't be asking. Have you had COVID? And if the answer is yes, you might likely be more likely to be hired. So that could be a potential cause of action down the road. Another one that's kind of interesting now is, as you guys all know probably, you're typically not compensated. Non-exempt employees are typically not compensated for commuting time. And when you look at your primary work location, the time that it takes you to get from home to your primary work location and back is not something you get paid for. Now, with work from home for 5, 6, 7 months, some employees are starting to take the position that work is their now primary work location. So when the employer requires them to come to the office, that's a diversion from their primary work location, and they have to be paid for the commuting time, whether it's an hour or 2 hours each way, whatever it might be, from their home to their office and back. Again, speculative, up in the air, but something to look ahead to as a potential claim. And then finally, way back in the old days in January, we used to have people who would have ADA issues, and they'd look for reasonable accommodations. And very often a reasonable accommodation request would be, can I work from home? And more often than not, the answer would be no. You can't work from home. That's not reasonable. It would create an undue hardship. We can't allow that. Fast forward now, we're seeing, what percentage of people working from home for 6 months. So the question is going to be post-COVID, as we recover from that and get back to more of a normal work relationship, somebody says, I need to work from home because of my disability as a reasonable accommodation. Our employer is now going to be impacted by the fact that for months, they allowed most of their workforce to work from home, and it didn't put them out of business. Again, I don't have answers. I love giving you problems without answers, but these are some things that courts are going to have to be deciding. There's some questions and challenges that are likely to be raised in the months and years ahead. So I just thought I'd point them out. And with that, I will send it back to Vicki. You're muted, Vicki.
Yep, I got it. Holly, do you want to progress to the next slide? So we are happy to have Holly DePalma from MidAtlantic Employers Association with us today. Holly and myself and Juno go way back. She was one of our first clients, one of our first candidates, and has become a real good friend of Juno over the years. And we're excited to have her here today to talk about a really timely topic, which is unconscious bias in the interview process. And she has, along with her, a colleague of hers who's also going to talk about some diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that are tied closely to that. And so I'm going to let Holly tee this up. She has really good information. This is a lengthier slide presentation than we normally do. we will make the slides available to everyone afterwards, so you don't have to take, tons and tons of notes. But if there are any questions during the presentation and there's time for interjection, you can just type them in the chat and we'll try to interrupt. If not, you can save them for the end and we'll allow some time for some Q&A. So I will tee up Holly.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. This is, as I was explaining to the team earlier before we started, this has been sort of a pet sort of passion of mine, just working in HR and hiring for the past 30 years and sort of banging my fists and saying to people, you hire people who are just like you. And I'm really, I feel really hopeful that the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and we're talking about unconscious bias, we're talking about all these things, and that we do have the opportunity to really make some change. And I think HR people are at this forefront of this. And I'm so happy to have Sienna Williams with me, mostly because she's the one who knows everything.
Oh my gosh, no.
Sienna is in charge of MidAtlantic Employers Association Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group. And she does a lot of training. Sienna's an attorney. So what I thought that this would be a good partnership, particularly around questions that people might have as we talk about an expanded idea. And I do have more slides, but that's usually really just to help keep me focused. So please feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to talk. Like I said, I do have slides, but it's really, it'll go quickly, I hope. So since it is it Thursday? No, Wednesday afternoon. So unconscious bias in hiring. So we've had a lot of discussion in our workplaces around diversity, equity, and inclusion this summer. It's really the top of mind of people. Most companies have come out, and particularly after the social unrest this summer and the killing of George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor death, the companies have really come out and said, we given diversity and inclusion statements. Most of us as HR professionals have really expanded our recruiting funnel to be more inclusive. Some people have gotten training, and we're really trying to create a cultural environment that is inclusive. We do lots of these workshops, et cetera, and I'm sure you are all doing these things. There's still a threat in our workplace, and that sounds dramatic, but when you research this, it really is a very big challenge, and it is unconscious bias or implicit bias, and really this is natural. It is the first step to combating unconscious bias in the workplace is to understand what it means and how it impacts our behavior. It's a natural thing our brains do. Unconscious bias or implicit bias is underlying attitudes and stereotypes that we attribute to another person or group of people unconsciously that affect how we understand and engage with a person or group. Let me give you an example. Oh, that person went to Harvard. They're really smart, right? That has nothing to do with race, religion, sex, etc. But that's a stereotype that our brain takes this information and because we get so many, and I'm not a neuroscientist, thank God, but we get so much information that it's what our brain has evolved to do, to put and encapsulize pieces of like things in similar buckets, right? So let's talk about how this really matters in the hiring environment. First thing that everybody's going to say, and is not me, I don't have any biases. Yes, you do. Again, it is as simple as to say that somebody who goes to Harvard is smart. This is how we make decisions about others based on what we feel is safe, reliable, and valuable to us. Unconscious processing drives the majority of important decisions we make. I mean, our brains are really strong and powerful tools. There are over 150 types of unconscious bias. I'm only going to deal with 120 I'm kidding. I'm going to deal with 5. There's far too many. And what I really want to address are the pieces that we encounter in the recruitment environment and how we can help our organizations and our managers around this unconscious bias part. So affinity bias is the tendency to connect with people who are like us. When I started doing this research, I thought, oh my goodness, this is the first thing I do when I look at a resume, is I look at where did they work, who might we know in common, right? Or where did they go to school? Maybe we took some of the same classes. This is trying to connect. We naturally gravitate towards others who share the same experiences, backgrounds, and interests. It is natural. It is what we do. Confirmation bias is an inclination to draw conclusions about a person or a situation based on our personal beliefs and prejudice. It's pretty much my Harvard example, but here are 2 examples. Assuming a female candidate with small children will be more likely to frequently call out sick or leave work early because they have small children, and that she will be the person who takes care of their children, not the husband or the other partner. A candidate with an international name might have a certain language proficiency or deficit. Oh, we need somebody who can communicate well, right? These are things that I've heard from managers who I've recruited for, and I'm sure are not unfamiliar to most of us, right? The halo and horn effect. This is a tendency, and this is more my Harvard example, a tendency to allow a specific trait to positively or negatively influence our evaluation of somebody. I thought this was really amazing when I was researching this, but an example is assuming a candidate who is, tall and stately and charismatic is going to make a stronger leader because of how they present themselves. Or conversely, dismissing a candidate because he or she maybe didn't go to an Ivy League school and maybe worked for somebody whose company you're not that inclined to think is all that special, perhaps a competitor, right? So here we're making assumptions based on things that we've not communicated with this individual about or really tried to learn about. Gender bias. This is something that I think is pretty familiar to most of us. And this is obviously the tendency to prefer one gender over another. And typically this bias really favors males. According to the EEOC, males account for 70% of manager and senior executive roles in the private sector. And I mean, it's a really common situation, right? That we have challenges with looking at people of a different gender as being equal. So hopefully we're getting past that. Groupthink or conformity bias. This is really dangerous. And when I read about this, I didn't really think of this as a bias, but it really is. This is sort of, the adult version of peer pressure, and where you're in a group of 6 people who all interviewed the candidate and you don't really like that candidate, but everybody else loved them and you don't say anything because you don't want to rock the boat, right? That's conformity bias and giving up to the group, right? Not making your point known. And this can really lead to making some poor hiring decisions. So let's give you some stats. In a study completed in 2016, white names got called back 50% more than black names, regardless of industry or occupation. Applicants with disabilities received 26% fewer expressions of interest from potential employers. And the likelihood that a woman, sorry, my notes are covered. The likelihood that a woman would be hired when done with blind auditions increased from 25 to 46%. This is like, I talk all the time. My favorite television show, well, when there was television, is I can't think of the name. Oh, The Voice, right? Where they have the blind auditions because they are truly evaluating someone to participate in a singing contest just on their voice. And it was something that really upset me about American Idol, which was you had to have the look. And I found, such value in a show that was like, we really just care what your voice is. And they turned around blind. I know there's another study, Sienna, I know you told me about that, an orchestra did blind auditions and increased their women in the
Exactly.
orchestra.
And I think it was something like year over year, they increased their female representation by 15 to 20%. And while to some of us that might seem like a small number, right? When you think about what it's saying, right? It's such a skilled talent that you have to practice over time, right? It's not possible that all of a sudden women learned how to play the strings better, right? To be admitted into that orchestra in that 1 year, in terms of, passing that threshold. They were there, they were ready, they had the skills and talent, and adding in that blind audition, truly blind. I think they even had to address footwear, like hiding the footwear as well, because people were getting a tell by getting to see footwear. They were able to increase their female representation without doing anything else.
Right.
So it can be really
it's astounding.
Yeah.
So, and I think that this is probably, again, just a real overview and reminder to something we all know about the importance of, or the linkage, I should say, between diversity and business success. McKinsey did a study that found that gender, ethnic, and cultural diversity, particularly within executive teams, continue to be correlated to financial performances across multiple countries worldwide. I work with executive teams all day, every day. And I struggle, and we struggle to work together, of how many times they can be so similar, right? It really is part of your success. Organizations with the most ethnically diverse executive teams are 33% more profitable. That's an astounding figure. And I really, when I first gave this presentation, I added all this data in because I can translate as far too passionate and emotional, and that this is a personal issue for me. And while it is, I think these numbers really help put some like, this is real reason why a business would be concerned about this. Not only is it the right thing to pay attention to, Forbes said companies with more women in executive positions have a 34% higher return to shareholders than those who do not. These are reasons for a business to pay attention. Companies with the most women directors have 26% higher return on invested capital than those with the least. So I'm done, just hire women. No, I'm kidding. So,
And may I share a couple thoughts?
yeah.
Is that okay? So I just wanted to share that I think from really thinking of it from an HR perspective, and sort of trying to move to that level of HR practice where you're thinking more strategically and you're viewed as sort of a business partner at the table, able to help guide a company to their goals and align the people efforts with those business goals, right? I think this is sort of a hidden gem of sorts, right? Because unconscious bias, it does have all these really negative impacts on, sort of creating a barrier to inclusion, having individuals of minority backgrounds, whether it's race or gender or national origin, participating fully in your workforce. But this is also about sort of when you focus on and learn about unconscious bias and what to do to put guardrails in place to keep it from leading your decision-making astray, you are genuinely making better decisions as an organization. And when you learn about it and try to counteract the negative effects of it in the course of working, it's the same thing. You are giving your employees and your leaders space to make better decisions. And I think of all the biases Holly kind of just summarized for us, I just delivered a training this morning on these, right? And one of the scenarios I say to think about is your manager is interviewing someone, right? And they sort of go off talking about a personal interest. It could be playing golf. It could be I'm interviewing someone and they start talking about reality TV, right? And I was in the beginning saying my guilty pleasure of watching reality TV. Oh my gosh, I love that you watch reality TV too, right? You're amazing. What have I done? I've gone completely off course from what I should be focused on, which is what my organization needs from this candidate, right? And so when we clear away that pull of unconscious bias, we make space for actually learning and using the skills to make better decisions for our organizations. And the void has to be filled with the correct approach, which comes to things like interviewing techniques. And I mean, we could go on with that, but I just kind of wanted to share those 2 cents in terms of how we place this type of information in our minds as we as HR folks are thinking about sort of strategic HR.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you know, the last piece of data I think I'm going to share about, you know, sort of why this matters. Folks who perceive, you know, this is an issue that is very compelling to the workforce. Millennials make up what, 50% of the workforce now? Is that number about right, Sienna?
Sorry, I'm busy like going through seeing all of our participants and what's going on. Yes, so they will make up, I believe it's about 3/4 of the workforce in 5 years. So,
Yeah, so
that's sort of the projection. Yeah.
Right, we're around 40%, 50% now. So these workers are 3 times more likely to leave their current jobs if they perceive unconscious bias at work. Nearly 3 times more likely to not share ideas and creative solutions if they perceive unconscious bias. And 3 times as likely to be disengaged at work. And we all know about how terrible disengagement is for organizations. So, so what can we do, right? I really focused on some really clear, actionable strategies that you can do tomorrow. Well, maybe not tomorrow. But so the first thing is Project Implicit. And I can't see faces, but I wish I could, to ask how many people have heard about this. So Dr. Banaji is at Harvard professor who started Project Implicit. And Project Implicit is an opportunity for you to go onto this website and evaluate your own unconscious bias. And I started this presentation with the, oh, it's not me. Yeah, yes, it is. It's how our brains work. And you can't sort of overcome something that you don't know what it is. So here's an opportunity, Project Implicit. All you have to do is Google it, and it's a very unattractive website, very unfancy, very, very academic looking, and there's a survey you can take to understand your unconscious bias. You can diversify your hiring team. It is an opportunity that you have to say, how can I bring somebody who brings a different perspective and a different background into this discussion? And it doesn't have to be an executive or a manager or a leader. It can be somebody who, you know, it's a great opportunity, a great way to maybe mentor an individual who shows high potential and who may be a person of color or who may be somebody from a diverse background. But it is, and it's critical to have another lens because we do tend to like people and hire people who are like us. Oh, yeah. So this was the blind hiring. This is where, you know, I certainly blind hiring is probably not feasible and it's not really applicable. However, you can obscure certain pieces of identifiable information from a resume. This is a heat map of a 6-second, which is an initial review of a resume. And the average is 6 seconds. And you see where the eyes go. They go to the top, which is the name. Then they go to their current job, and then they go to education. What if you removed names and addresses from candidate resumes, where truly what somebody was looking at was just their work experience, not making assumptions about their neighborhood, where they live, and their name, not making, those are very, very easy places where the initial bias will come in. And then, I hesitated to add this second, but I'm going to put it out there, especially because I think I have an audience of HR people, but remove your education, right? If we say on a job description, bachelor's degree is required, and they have a bachelor's degree, does it really matter where the education is from? We have learned so much recently about bias in education systems where, it's not necessarily that the smartest one gets in. It's not. So we have an opportunity. Could you, and I struggled with that, but if you're an HR person and you give resumes that just have the work experience and just have, other things that an individual might do, or awards that they have received, that goes a long way in trying to sort of eliminate some biases.
And Holly, may I share? May I tack onto
yeah.
that? So some companies also take the approach, it's right in line with what you're saying, and then, or dividing it up. Like, so the person who sees the full resume is going to be different from the person who's really evaluating that person, in other regards. So a lot of these sort of techniques and things to be thinking about in terms of guardrails in this process are about removing subjectivity. So openings where and to Holly's point, they are these sort of critical points where our brains are inclined to try and fill in the blanks or make assumptions. And it's about getting rid of that subjectivity, which once again, if we're trying to make the best decision possible, removing subjectivity is a big part of that. And that comes even before you get to this point with respect to things like job descriptions, right? The language that's being used in there's data out there that, if your wording is, if you're using a certain vocabulary, you're very likely not going to get female applicants. And versus if you are, and it's something to be thinking about, right? It's not to say you have to do everything differently, but it is, when the data sort of shows us these things, it's definitely something to consider. So we sometimes are guiding companies that say, we're trying everything we can to get diverse applicants, right? And I'm wondering, have they done that, right? Have they looked at the wording of their job description? There are some free tools available, I know, for gender coded language that you can run things through. And as is with the case with many things in the HR area, there are also a variety of paid tools and assessments that people could opt for. But again, just trying to remove those points of subjectivity.
Thanks. And then this is a challenge I'm sure everybody has faced numerous times, if not once or twice, but they don't fit, right? That elusive fit. They don't fit our culture. And I absolutely believe that culture is important in an organization. And it is one of the things I just absolutely love about staying connected to Vicki and Michael and Juno. I just think the culture and how the organization is growing I'm so impressed with it. How do you interview for culture and for fit? So here's a few things, and I've done a lot of work with my clients on this, and it requires you as an organization to do a couple of things. First, you need a very clearly defined cultural and set of values. What do we value in this organization? And then once you have that clear, you get an opportunity to ask questions that are really directly related to helping you understand a candidate's commitment to that value, right? And then you apply this consistently. And so, we have an example here, honesty and ethics, right? Might be important. So a question could be, tell me about a time when you had to make a decision that your boss, something kind of decision around an ethical decision that you had to make. Get somebody to really share how that happened.
May I share?
Yes.
It's like a hypothetical, right? So I remember this from when I was a first-year associate working with one of the toughest partners in our department at a big law firm. And I remember sharing this in an interview. And he asked me to take a book, to essentially copy, Xerox an entire book. And I was like such a rule follower. And I'm like, that's not correct. I shouldn't copy the entire book. I should just buy it. Like, that's really what I should do. And I just out of my own funds bought the book. Like, it's like, and I remember revealing it to him much later and him going, oh my gosh, you know, like that's so crazy. But that's how strict I was about the legal ethics and the professional ethics at that point in time. He actually loved it later, right? But
and that would be a perfect answer to tell me about a time that you were challenged ethically, right? Can you give an example of a mistake? Can you give an example of a mistake you made that you didn't bring to someone's attention? So this is not just checking, that's really checking that humility, right? And then you're going to see on the right-hand side, there's a score. It's not just, did I like their answer? It's you give and assess an objective way. And imagine if you say you have, 5 different values in your culture, and you could make up 5 questions for each of the values. You don't have to ask each one, but you ask consistently, and you're getting a really good gauge of how someone fits or doesn't fit your culture. And it's not that easy. These are hard interview questions. Oftentimes we do group interviewing, and I make people uncomfortable because I ask real questions about this. And, and I say to people, you might be a little uncomfortable, but I want you to take some time and think about answering this question. And I know that most of the people on this call are probably professional interviewers, and this is nothing new to you. But it is a way that when somebody says they don't fit or they don't manage, this is a way you can help sort of create an objective opportunity to evaluate someone's fit. And then finally, you can add data to the process. And we got a question before about artificial intelligence replacing, I can't quite remember exactly the question, but it was around artificial intelligence. And data, when I say add data, you can use scientifically validated tools to help you make better selections. And this is not the only tool you're going to be using to make that decision. You're still going to evaluate a resume. You're still going to evaluate an interview for what somebody can do. But when you add data and assess what you need from a behavioral and cognitive standpoint of a job, and you're able to look at how does this candidate match up, it ends up being a very, very objective tool to help overcome unconscious bias. I worked, I should say, with a very enormous organization that had 2% women in their organization. And the objective here was to say, let's bring in people who maybe don't, so what was happening, and I do remember another question was asked about referrals. How do we still use referrals and not get all the same people? Well, this is precisely why they wanted to use this tool, was because referrals were giving them all the same exact person, right? So instead of just using referrals, they added data which said, we can weight the head. So I go head, heart, briefcase. Briefcase is your skills and experience. Your heart is your fit and your ability to emulate and believe in our values. The head is how a person naturally works. How quickly do we learn and how do we naturally work? So when you add these, this is my head, heart, briefcase. When you add these behavioral and cognitive measures from a scientifically validated system, you're actually taking away the propensity to lean on things that can potentially be giveaway to unconscious bias. So the assessment I use is the predictive index. I've worked with Shelley along this tool. It takes about 6.5 minutes to complete. We measure 4 basic behavioral drives. This tells us how a person measures, or how a person will act. Just like people have behaviors, jobs have required behaviors. And then you can assess individuals based on their fit into that job. You can set this up in your system to not even see names. So you're just looking at people who might fit and starting with interviews from that perspective. Let me give you an example. This is a hunter sales profile, a typical driving sales oriented person who takes risk, who connects with people, who's very goal oriented. And here are 4 candidates. This is a great candidate. It's not a perfect fit, but it's a great candidate. This person's going to go to the top, and you're going to look at this person with another lens. This is just another lens in which to look at a person. And so while I'm not suggesting that this replaces any of the interview part, it is an addition of data added early in that process to help eliminate unconscious bias. Just like I would never recommend only hiring on data. I do believe Amazon did that in a couple of their locations when they were hiring. They didn't have any interviews. They just hired on assessments. I don't recommend that. It's a piece of the process. It's a data point. So I tried to really quickly go through all these. As you know, by way of summary, diversity and inclusion and equity are important issues that are facing many organizations. Unconscious bias can hold you back from making any real headway for your organization to be more diverse and inclusive. And I tried to give you I presented 5 ideas of how you can confront unconscious bias and really tackle it in that hiring process by evaluating your biases, diversifying your hiring team, doing some blind hiring by eliminating a name and maybe educational, presenting a different way to assess cultural fit, and presenting very briefly a way to add scientific data into the process. As an organization, we're here to help. You know, I believe in better work, better worlds. And I do believe we all, you know, this is a really important factor, and we are all in seats that can probably really drive some momentum here. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I think there are some questions that have gone into chat.
I was taking a look at chat, Holly, and folks were talking about something that I know I've struggled with, and you've given me some guidance on this in the past, that kind of distinction and difference about identifying an organization's values versus sort of like what I think, and people were describing it differently in the chat, but are like soft skills, things like adaptability or collaboration that are kind of indicators of success among a variety of people, right? Like kind of across a number of candidates. But the difference between cultural fit and cultural values for your organization versus some of those other things, kind of how you define them. I mean, it can be challenging, and it's absolute. Someone commented people kind of take different views on identifying those organizational values. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Holly.
So
That's okay.
I was reading questions, and Michael, is it okay if I read yours?
Yeah, of course.
So Michael says, we've really challenged ourselves over the past year slightly more to think about how we hire and why, and what that was creating internally. We often found people opportunistically, which meant introductions from teams or people reaching out thinking they'd fit with us. Being more thoughtful and working harder towards all these well-articulated points from Holly has been a huge help in us getting stuck in the rut of groupthink. We're still and will always work towards these goals, but it's such an important topic. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was a question. I think that this.
You wanted to read it because I said something nice about you.
Oh yes,
brilliant.
indeed. I want to read it out loud.
It's not a question, but I should highlight that Michael said something very kind.
Yes. No, I thought it was a question for me, which is where I saw my name.
The second part's a little bit of a question, Holly, in terms of like job postings, because this is another topic we're really thinking about and looking towards, you know, for resources in terms of sort of freshening up job postings and sort of understanding which job postings, you know, attract who and why, and sort of how to remove the bias from postings.
Yeah, so Sienna so I'm going to give my pitch for that first, and then Sienna can give hers. So in using assessments in this process, there are words that connect and attract. I'm going to use, has nothing to do with gender bias here, but there are words. So if I am recruiting for customer service operator, right, which is going to have a behavioral profile that's opposite of that captain salesperson I showed you, right? And this is going to be a person who, words that resonate for that person are support, steady, family environment, training, calm environment. We give you the support and the training you need. So I look to what the way that I help clients formulate job descriptions and advertisements are around words that link to a job, that link to the kind of behavior you want to attract. Whereas for a sales position, it's work independently, meet your quota, do what you want, drive change, right? Like those are things that would that attract somebody from that perspective. And Sienna, I think, has some familiarity with other tools.
Well, no, and that is sort of, it's remarkable what your tool can do. And there's nothing that's I'm aware of that's available sort of to the public for free that even approaches that level of comprehensiveness. But there is sort of, I think even like Gmail and Google have done this. There's like a gender coded language finder, right? And there is a free sort of tool out there for trying to identify. You can kind of paste in a job description and it will highlight for you what it thinks are gender coded words. I hesitate to say rely on that because it is sort of this free tool and we can't really assess a ton of what it's based on. But if people are kind of just curious, I think of it as a thing to kind of explore that in that way.
There's a really good question in the chat.
Yeah.
You seen that, Holly? Okay, go
Yeah.
Alan. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, Alan, I got to tell you, that's so gross and offensive to me. And we've talked so much and about how it's not that there's not talent to recruit from, right? It's that you are not creating the opportunity for different people. And we talked about it. It's like, where do people get their first job, right? I caddy at a golf course and then I get hired, right? Well, why doesn't that golf course offer the opportunity to maybe a school, maybe not, Central Bucks South or whatever those schools, I'm sorry, I'm not from here, but, and maybe offer it to Cheltenham High School, right? Like, give that opportunity to look past your tunnel vision, which typically includes people like yourself. It's astounding that people can actually make these comments. I mean, I work with a private equity firm in New York that is all ethnically and multiculturally racially diverse. And it's just so unbelievably not true. But I also believe it's when people have those blinders where they don't know how to expand their networks. Go ahead, Sienna.
I'm like, oh my gosh, two things. One, if you look at the data, right? Like go to the data, you'll see that it's not perfect, but we have as a country made strides in terms of getting more racial minority representation in colleges and universities. Same thing with gender. But what has not changed is the rate of callbacks for interviews of these qualified applicants. When you compare racial minorities and women to young white males with the same experience or the white males being less experienced, the data shows they will get way more callbacks and they'll get callbacks for jobs that pay more. And I have to emphasize the data because so often people are thinking this is sort of a personal point of view. It's grounded in data. And so we've made some progress and should continue in terms of, as a society producing diverse qualified candidates. But now we really need to look at the barriers in the hiring process and how we sort of, as to your point, Holly, and using your words, provide opportunities for success within our workplaces. And having personally been involved with large banks and representing large banks in the past, I've overseen the exact types of training programs that he was talking about when he's saying there aren't qualified people. And it's just not true. They're qualified, they go through the training program, and what happens when you complete the training program is you have to call on all those people you know with millions of dollars of assets to give to you to trust to manage. And it's not only minority candidates who don't do it. I would say 75% of those large wirehouse firms, 75% of their trainees don't make it as financial advisors. I'm probably being generous. It's probably a higher percentage than that. And they are disproportionately racial minorities, but there are tons of non-racial minorities in that group as well. Why is there a disproportionate number of racial minorities? What we're talking about, right? The sort of like Holly's point about use your connection you made on the golf course to all those, sort of individuals with lots of assets that they would like to have you manage, right? Oh, wait, I don't have any of those, right? So I could go on and on, but.
I think that one of the things in our organization, I look back to how I got my first job. I was mediocrely educated. I roll into Philadelphia, and my mother's neighbor is the former treasurer of a major university. And I find old people very interesting in their stories, and he was not well, and I used to go listen to his stories. And he said, would you like to have a job? And I said, yeah. Aww. That's white privilege, right? I said, my girlfriend said, I used to waitress at the Marion Cricket Club. And, this man who he and his wife loved when I waited on them all summer long gave me my first job. That's exactly what we're talking about, where you're giving opportunity in ways where it's
strongly influenced by unconscious bias, if you're not at least kind of recognizing that concept.
See,
right?
Why I brought Sienna? She can articulate so much more.
No, you did great. And I wasn't interrupting you, Holly, because you're spot on, and what I love about your tool is the objectivity it brings. And even just your perspective from having worked with that tool. I think you are able to help people inject that objectivity anyway.
Have people had this come up in their work? Are we like near time? Are we totally over? I have no idea what's happening. Have people had to, or have people been doing certain things or been addressing things? Tori, I believe you got certified to be a diversity recruiter. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. I read LinkedIn, girls.
You did.
I pay attention. So I'd love to hear what people are doing. I know that we've had many of our members contact us, and Sienna's training all the time and teaching. And a lot of this is about, we have this really fabulous session where a lot of this is just listening a little bit to hear somebody else's point of view. And to hear what we could do a little differently.
Well, if I could interject too, I also think, as someone said earlier, either Sienna or Holly, as HR leaders, it's our responsibility to hold people accountable differently internally, right? Like, I used to work at a company that had a very, very, very palpable culture. Like, you could smell it and feel it when you walked into any office. Like, it was that palpable. And oftentimes we would hear, well, she's not a culture fit. And I'd go, well, what does that mean? Right. And so I think we're also responsible to push back on that, or have a more structured, objective way of either qualifying in or out those human beings for whatever the right reasons are. But I think that's where we have to exercise our muscles as professionals to differently influence those organizations, and to be bold about it and not give up. Otherwise, it's not going to change. And God help us if there's more Wells Fargos in the world.
Agreed.
I like all the head shaking I see about Wells Fargo. No, I'm just kidding, but everyone's kind of, And I wanted to share, it kind of connects to that, and then I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to be quiet, but likability. This is a place where people really struggle, and it sometimes overlaps with this idea of cultural fit, right?
Yeah.
And likability is something that you're very likely to encounter some resistance about eliminating it as a consideration. And so one suggestion I have, which I completely got from reading other people's materials, okay, is first, get your folks to assess, does likability matter for this role? right? Because there are some roles within organizations where it truly does not matter. And then if it matters, break it out as a separate factor, right? So you have, let's say I'm working with Holly. I have Holly's data point. I have my feedback from the panel or group of individuals who interviewed the person. I have the person who looked at their resume and verified their credentials. And I have a separate likability factor from everyone. Because by breaking it out, you can control how much you're considering it and influencing it in the decision-making process. So I just share that as sort of a small tip that for me was like, ding, this makes sense. I want to offer this to people because we get a lot of resistance on that, even from people who are very well-intentioned in this area.
Other questions for our expert panel?
Michael, do you have something to say?
Oh, I always have something to say. Do you want me to? I mean, I think that this was fantastic, and I think this is really an interesting inflection point from a historically. I think we'll look back on this time an inflection point that there's real meaningful change, and just Juneau as a micro example. I mean, we fell victim to this, Holly, to what you mentioned earlier. I mean, we never had a formal internship program, but a client would say, "Hey, my kid's back for the summer. Could you put him or her to work?" And we just through connections, and all our interns ended up looking very similar. No surprise. And so we're starting to be very thoughtful about how we approach this. And we have been. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's been really meaningful. And it sort of trickles down to us even holding our clients more accountable than we ever have in the past. And so I think this has been a great conversation, very timely, very meaningful. And I think real change is happening. I really do. I feel a shift, and I hope people agree.
I mean, I'm hopeful. Some days are better than others.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, my fingers are crossed.
Some days are better than others, but I do believe that there's sort of people are much more interested, and they understand the business picture of this and the benefits to the society. It's just the right thing to do, from so many aspects.
All right.
Well, this was good. I was depressed after last night's debate, but I feel reinvigorated. I feel like,
Not to mention there might be a red wine shortage.
Oh,
What?
Wait.
Go to the store immediately.
Sally's following my Facebook rants.
Because of the wildfires
Oh,
in California.
in Napa.
Yes. We have lots of problems happening right now. This notwithstanding. But Holly and Sienna, thank you so much. I don't know, Vicki, is there anything else you wanted to wrap up?
No, I'm thrilled you guys were able to join us. Sienna, I'm glad you hopped on. It was really valuable to have your perspective as well. And, I think that we continue these conversations back at our workplaces. Just to tag on to what you said about Tori, like Tori got her diversity training for recruiting. So did someone else on our team. And they're now going to conduct it internally with our whole team, so we can keep spreading that out and also educate our clients. So we're hopefully, as a spider web, it'll trickle out in the community.
And just to confirm, we're going to send the deck out to everybody, right? Good.
Well, we have somebody teed up for the 16th, I think it is, right? 2 weeks from today?
The 14th.
The 14th, sorry, 2 weeks from today. Yeah, yes. So stay tuned for that invite, and we appreciate you all coming, and thank you so much. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, Shelley. Thanks,
Thank
Shelley.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.